absolute honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Ben Witherell, who serves as the Chief Economist of the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, as well as the Director of the Office of Economist. As the Chief Economist, he advises the President and other board members regarding various economic conditions that impact utilities, as well as clean energy programs. Before joining the public utilities sector, he worked as the Director of Economic Analysis for the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection for 8 years. And prior to that, he has over 15 years of experience in private sector, in public policy, as well as environmental consultant in benefit cost analysis. He is our very own, as he completed his PhD here at Montclair State, and he has a master's degree in engineering from University of Michigan and BS from Tufts University. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, hello everybody, and thank you very much for being here today. Thank you, Dr. Lal. Thank you, Movir, for the introduction. Very happy to be here today. I think I just must have hit something. And we'll try to get that off of there. Yeah, I don't think we really need that. So again, welcome back. We're here now for the session on greening the grid. And I actually like that slide a little better, so let's see where that is. Yeah, there we go. So I'm really happy to be joined today by some folks who have just spent a career in this field, and I'm very lucky, and I think we're very lucky, all of us today, to have the folks here on this panel. These people have such an incredible depth of experience in the area of the transmission grid, green energy, clean energy, the combination of the two, which we're going to really talk about in some detail here today, which is a real challenge. This is one of the biggest challenges still facing clean energy, and how to be able to transition to a state, a country, a world where we have a much, much higher degree of our energy supply coming from energy that does not burn fossil fuel or create greenhouse gases. So that is a challenge. It's one of the biggest challenges. New Jersey is, I think, a leader and in the forefront of addressing this issue and making the real changes that are sustainable and can be with us and helping us for a long time in this transition. So we're going to do a little bit of a more discussion today. So I'm going to invite you, all of you, the audience, to engage with the panel and ask questions. We're first just going to have kind of a brief introduction from each of the panelists. I kind of set out a little challenge for them to put all of their ideas into one single slide. So it's going to be a little bit different. They're each going to have a couple minutes to sort of introduce their ideas that they're bringing to the table today for our session. And then we're just going to open it up to a conversation about greening the grid and how do we reach the goals that we're trying to accomplish. So with that, I'll do some real quick introductions. Happy to have Abe Silverman, whose, I think, official title now is Executive Policy Counsel at the Board of Public Utilities. Abe has a long history of working in energy supply and energy markets, as well as energy policy. I'm not going to go into everybody's real deep background, because I think what we all want is to really get to the conversation at hand. But suffice it to say, all of these panelists are well-degreed, extremely well-educated, have way more experience than I do, and know so much more than most people that we could have even hoped to get here today. So we've got Sue Glatz, Director of Strategic Initiatives and Interregional Planning from PJM. Obviously, that's the group that keeps the grid going and makes sure that we've got power when we want it. We also have with us Kathleen Spies, principal with the Brattle Group, her officer in Washington, D.C., but I happen to know from firsthand experience that she works all around the world and has a lot of experience, not just helping us here in New Jersey with our transmission policy, but also many other states around the country and even globally. So, and she also has many years of experience working in these areas. And we also have Mike Kormos, Senior Advisor with Mid-Atlantic Offshore Development. That may be a name you're not as familiar with, but I think you will soon be very familiar with that name as well and that organization, as they have been awarded the first project under the new state agreement approach for transmission here in New Jersey, and that's definitely going to be something that we'll be talking about in a few minutes. And I want to, then we can, I'm not sure what slide order we got here, so that's why I'm a little bit figuring this out on the fly. So, again, as I mentioned, each person's got a single slide that sort of is something that they want to use to springboard us into the conversation. So we'll just go, yeah, I'm not going to mess around with trying to reorganize the slides. So we'll just go in the order that they're in. And first up is going to be Abe Silverman, and then we're going to have Mike Kormos, and then Kathleen, and then Sue from PJM. So I'm going to get that slide up, hopefully, and we can be off and running. So thank you all again, and buckle up because this is going to be a lot of fun. So Abe, take it away.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ben, for those very kind introduction. So I love this challenge of putting all of New Jersey's energy policy into a single slide. And I actually spent a lot of time thinking about this because there were so many different options. We could talk about our solar program. We could talk about offshore wind. We could talk about the cost of doing all this affordably. We could talk about electrification of both transportation and buildings. And I thought this one from our 2019 Energy Master Plan really summed up a lot of the challenges that we have. And before we even get to the colors, I just want you to take a look at the trajectory of that black line. That's New Jersey load between now and 2050, assuming that we are on the least cost path to decarbonizing our economy, which includes a lot of building electrification, includes electrification of the transportation sector, both heavy and light duty vehicles, as well as a number of other features, including things like very aggressive energy efficiency. That is a massive increase in the amount of electricity we expect New Jersey to be using over the next 30 years. We're talking double the amount of electricity, and that means sort of thinking about both the supply side and getting all of the clean electricity we need to meet that load growth. And it really means really fundamentally rethinking our distribution system as well. Because, you know, as robust a system as you can have on the transmission or distribution side, once you start throwing 2x the amount of power over that system, that, you know, you got to step back and really think about how to manage that very exciting transition. So that's the first place, you know, that I sort of want to direct people to. None of these numbers are precise, you know, because this is now 3 years old and economics are changing and the modeling is changing every day. But directionally, you know, it's in the right direction. So you can see we're looking at moving fossil gas lower and lower, at least in terms of power generation over the next 30 years, eventually replacing it with a very small sliver of biogas. You know, that could be clean hydrogen or some other technology late in the 2040s, as well as a lot of development of the solar and wind. And this includes both in-state resources and out-of-state resources. And, you know, and I think about these challenges, and I think the one thing that we need to make all this work is you. And I'm particularly thinking of the students in the room. Because we need, you know, one of the most critical things to making government work is having students and even mid-career or late career professionals, including myself, come into government service. I see people from DEP here. We're obviously here from the board, EDA. I would submit that you can have more potential impact on clean energy and decarbonizing the economy by coming to work for state government than you can just about anywhere else. And so, one of the things I go, when we talk to students in environments like this, or even people who know students, or people who themselves are interested in making that career transition, come talk to us. We would love to recruit you. We have, I won't say we have great pay, because we don't, but we have a disproportionate influence on where things go. So talk to Ben, talk to myself, talk to our colleagues from the other agencies. But the only way we get to this decarbonized future is if we can recruit people into government, if we can have the best thinking, and really, really progress. So I just invite all of you to have those conversations with us. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Abe. Okay, so we've got Mike's slide up here. So, Mike, if you can give us a couple minutes on what's happening here. You've got a lot on there, so maybe we'll give you an extra minute.
I don't plan on covering all of it. I actually had asked somebody to put everything they were worried about on the slide. Unfortunately, they did a really good job on that, and it's probably more than you need. But sort of the big issues, and just go back a little bit of, sort of how did we get there? Because what you're going to hear me say is current process really isn't working that good to integrate renewables into the grid. Why is that? And some of it was the actual interconnection process itself. It was developed and designed in a period where we were really going through the gas to coal conversion. You were talking about large gas plants that had the ability to move where they needed to move, could pick and choose where they wanted to develop. And the process was basically designed because we were also in the process of breaking up generation and transmission, deregulating, going to a competitive markets, particularly in the Northeast where we're at. And the cause was you wanted to really make sure that the generator paid his but-for cost. But for that generator hooking to the grid, what are the costs? And making sure they would always make sure they were paying their fair share. That led to a process that really required both sides, basically the people doing the study cooking the generators up, which is Sue and her group, to basically make sure it was the least cost. They were looking at what is the most economic way for that generator to basically come on board. And at the same time, from the customer perspective, the generator, they didn't want to pay any more than they had to. They were in a competitive business. And so that led this process of basically, when you're hooking generators up, you're building the least amount of transmission that you need to just to be reliable. And that was the main thing, just to make sure it's reliable. It was up to the market, so to speak, to find out about the cost effectiveness of that. What that led to is a process that I would almost say spaghetti string things together. Now again, when there are large generators, 1,600 megawatt combined cycle plants, it's fairly efficient. But with renewables, particularly with smaller wind farms in the 200 to 300 megawatt range, solar development, and even offshore wind, even though they're coming in much larger, you ended up with this spaghetti string of very minimal, smallest, lowest voltage interconnections into the grid as you could. And it worked for a good period of time because they picked the low-hanging fruits. People are very smart in this industry. They figured out where to go. They figured out how they could connect most efficiently. The problem is that is running out. There are not many spots. And what we see in the future, particularly with the Inflation Reduction Act and the incentives, is it's only going to get worse. And with those sort of smaller areas no longer available, really where we're at. You also then look at transmission development, and I'm not disagreeing with Abe as to where the load will go, but I would tell you in the last 2 decades, there has been very little load growth. And to recognize historically, transmission has been built on load growth expectations. That's what we've always keyed it to, was load growth. I do agree with where Abe says we're going with electrification, but right now we have seen very minimal investment in the actual transmission itself. And that's a little bit problematic. We're not making the investments we need to. Our generation interconnection process isn't necessarily set up to handle things like renewables, where renewables are much more confined as to where they can go. There's only one place offshore wind is going. We know where it is. And so I think that has been our challenge. And I will give New Jersey and the BPU in particular all the credit in the world. There was a process put in under Order 1000 of FERC called the SAA, the State Agreement Approach, which really allowed a way to look at the transmission needs for public policy. But I have to be honest with you, it was never tested. It has a very big cost implication to it, cost allocation as to who would pay. And New Jersey was the first to step up, to really take that on. I think everybody on the table will say it was probably bigger than anybody thought. They had a great turnout. Lots of big names are on my slide, showed up. 79 proposals were put in place. They range from very small, hundreds of thousands of dollars, actually tens of thousands of dollars in upgrades on the existing system to multi-billion-dollar offshore collector stations. They had a very tough job, but I think they came up with a very good answer, and not just because Mayotte won. We're thrilled to death that they did pick us. But we really think they took a very deliberate approach at looking what the first set of investments need to be to really help get the interconnection of the wind farms going for Solicitation 3 and forward. My hope is that we can build off of this. I've already ribbed Abe, I'm hoping there's an SAA 2. I'm hoping there's more states involved in that. As we said, this is not a New Jersey only problem. Probably from Virginia on up, we're going to see offshore wind development, and to see if we can't get some more states involved at really looking at what are the needs of the grids. Because it really does come down to, we can hook them up reliably. We will do that, there's no doubt. But can we do it in the most cost efficient, least cost to the ratepayers to get the maximum value as we move forward? So again, congratulations to New Jersey and PJM for doing this, and Brattle for doing all the work. Going forward, and again, hopefully this will trigger a lot more states to start thinking about the transmission needs, the transmission investments in a different way.
Great, thank you, Mike. Next up is Kathleen Spees from the Brattle Group.
Thank you. I work at the Brattle Group in wholesale power market design, so I am really focused these days on how to support wholesale power markets to integrate clean energy resources and really be a centerpiece for driving clean energy transition. And a lot of the challenges that are faced by these power markets, I mean, they differ by region. There are other places in the world that are much farther along than we are in the United States and in PJM as a region. And so the nature of the issues that we face differ substantially. But one of the things that we can think about, I guess, as a challenge or an opportunity for New Jersey is its position within one of the, well, probably still the largest wholesale power market in the world, and certainly the most experienced and internationally recognized as the most successful in terms of its ability to really reliably and efficiently drive operations and investment decisions across the grid in terms of the resource mix that it attracts and retains, as well as doing that reliably and integrating new resources. A lot of demand response, for example, was attracted before it was cool and before anybody even thought it could happen on a very competitive basis, getting us low-cost power reliably. Going forward, however, some of the foundational assumptions that kind of underpin not only PJM but all the wholesale power markets are really getting upended. Namely, the one that says we don't care about greenhouse gas emissions. That one is no longer valid, as we know, and it's increasingly turning into a very big challenge in terms of how to effectively operate the grid, how effectively to attract and retain resources. One of the challenges we saw early on when we did a piece of work with the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, and I have to say my most favorite assignment ever in my career, is taking a look at how can New Jersey maintain reliability and cost effectiveness in a competitive environment, given the fact that New Jersey is import dependent, relies on power imports from other parts of the region. We don't want to lose the benefits of being fully integrated into a reliable large system that can achieve a lot of cost efficiencies. But at the same time, we can't be involved in an overall financial circumstance that continues to attract investment in gas power plants that are soon enough going to become stranded assets that aren't doing anybody any good. So we took a look at that problem in partnership with the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, and now increasingly with other states across the PJM region, and building towards a really exciting opportunity to really reform and rebuild this regional marketplace to one that incorporates the clean energy objectives of all of the states into a new marketplace. So the New Jersey has proposed an integrated clean capacity market construct, ICCM, that could be a really foundational opportunity to attract green resources into the region, not just for New Jersey, but for the whole of PJM. All the way from Illinois to New Jersey. We've got 13 states and the District of Columbia all participating in this very exciting opportunity. So this slide here illustrates the impact that such a market could have. Some of the differences really depend on how far New Jersey and the other states want to push and how far and how fast by 2030. Some of the states may wish to push greenhouse gas emissions reduction and clean energy transition. But what we see here is, we're looking at this in three different ways: cost, energy mix, so megawatt hours, and capacity mix, so what resources are really providing reliability services in the grid. It takes quite a while to parse through this, but let me just give you a little headline. We could push about 20% more clean energy by 2030 at almost no cost, which is really phenomenal. And how is that even possible? It's because by internalizing the incentives as to who builds into the system and who's retained in the system, means that we can actually shift some of the consumer dollars that would be going to fossil resources. We can shift some of that to attracting new clean energy resources or retaining nuclear resources that, quite frankly, are potentially could retire if they're not retained. So this is just one of the slides that we pulled together through that analysis, just illustrating the benefits that can be achieved by coordinating in a broad regional marketplace and using competitive forces to do so. So really appreciate New Jersey's leadership among the PJM states to push this initiative forward.
Thank you, Kathleen. Sue Glatz from PJM. I know this shows a large geographic area, so let's hear about that. Thank you.
Oh, so good morning, everyone, and I'd like to just say thanks again for the opportunity to talk to everybody here about greening the grid and the role that PJM plays. I think a few others gave me a little bit of a partial introduction to PJM, but I'll just highlight that for those not familiar. It is a multi-state regional transmission organization, and PJM is responsible for planning the transmission for all or parts of 13 states, including the District of Columbia. We are independent of the entities, and so this is something I think earlier some of the other panelists talked about, some of the value of organizations like Montclair State and other universities having that independent role. And we direct the operation of the power grid, which includes the generation as well as planning the transmission. And the key goal, I think you already heard this too as well, is reliable operations and efficient wholesale markets. So that is our key objective. And that construct, as Mike knows, he knows well because he also worked at PJM in a prior life, so he has plenty of knowledge and experience about that. So that construct that was designed was not necessarily around addressing the needs for states that are looking to develop renewable resources, which have benefits that maybe go beyond or goals than what is simply the least cost of that generation that's going to serve the load. And so to recognize it and to account for that, PJM did implement a tool, which was the state agreement approach, to allow states that have broader goals or broader objectives that wish to implement them, but those rely on the development of transmission. And PJM is the transmission planner for the region. So in order to talk about transmission, I want to talk about why do we want to talk about it? Because it's offshore wind generation that we're looking to develop I know there are a lot of pieces to the greening the grid, but this is a really major building block to develop offshore wind. And it's not just New Jersey. So what I have shown up there, you'll notice there are several states along the PJM region that are on the Atlantic coast that are looking to develop offshore wind. So cumulatively, between these different states, we're looking at about 18 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035. And if you look to 2040, it's more like 25 or 26 gigawatts. So that's a major amount of energy that is going to be located off in federal waters off the coast, and we need to be able to transport or transmit that energy from offshore on land so that it can then be transmitted and distributed throughout the PJM region, not only in the New Jersey footprint, but even beyond that to other consumers that would be able to access this energy. To do that, you need transmission. Fortunately, there is a fair amount of robust system within the New Jersey footprint, although it doesn't quite get to the coastline. Another real value with New Jersey is they have about 135 miles of coastline, which can be accessed by the offshore wind farms. And just as a side note, I hear a little rumor that New York is a little jealous of the amount of coastline and access points that New Jersey has for offshore wind. And to New Jersey's credit is they have stepped up and are taking a lead role in to recognize the asset that they have here that can be a part of the overall clean energy plan. So I want to actually take a few moments and talk a little bit about that we have been working on. We've partnered essentially with the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities over the past two plus years to collaborate on soliciting transmission solutions that can address not just interconnecting one project that would just come in through our normal interconnection queue process, but planning more of a long-term overall programmatic multi-year program that could accommodate multiple projects generation. And I think the aspect of that is not only for an initial development, but also thinking in terms of how could this position New Jersey for the next wave of integrating the next level of generation. And this would only be possible with really the amount of commitment and engagement that we've had between PJM and New Jersey, as well as all the different agencies and entities that they've engaged and pulled into that circle to make this all a reality. Because when you're building anything as significant as this, PJM has a lot of expertise, but we don't have all the expertise. The states have a lot of expertise, but they still rely on others as well to complete that picture. And it takes time, it takes developers. We've heard from a number of developers as well that are also bringing a lot of knowledge, experience, and skills. And together, when you add all those pieces together, are what are going to essentially make this all possible. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention one other party too, and that is the federal level. This involves a lot of regulatory matters, and one of those key agencies is, of course, FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And in order to get them on board, there was a lot of groundwork that's probably not as visible, but really significant too, that's making it possible for us to be able to move forward with this very first time of the state agreement approach. That really it's the first in the PJM region, and it's a unique model, particularly because we are a multi-state RTO, or planning organization. So that being said, I just want, again, want to close with, this is only possible when there are a lot of entities that are really working together and everybody brings their expertise and their knowledge towards a well-defined goal, and really thanks to New Jersey that has been an outstanding partner with that, and we are hoping that this can set the stage for the other states in our footprint that are eager to implement their public policies so that we can work and actually achieve even more exciting things in the future.
Thank you, Sue. So I heard a lot of things there in those 4 short introductions. I heard that there is the need to continue, world-leading reliability in our electricity grid. How do we do that when so many of these cleaner, renewable energy types are intermittent? Interconnection, kind of the nuts and bolts of the system, the engineering, how do we actually connect, this voltage to that voltage or this transformer from AC to DC, things like that. So, there are challenges there as well, though those are probably things that we're much better at because we've been doing them for a long time, but nonetheless, there are challenges. The frameworks, what are the current statutes and regulations that support how these systems are built and constructed and funded, and are they adequate for this transition into, a clean energy dominated grid? How do we pay for it? Who pays? And then, what are some of the government policies and tools that are available to help push this transition forward? Tax policy, subsidies, support from FERC, et cetera. So I think the panelists have touched on a lot of those questions, and I think those are the questions that a lot of people have about how are we going to green the grid? How is it actually going to happen? So those could be sort of some guideposts, I think, for our conversation. Not sure if that's on a slide or not. I guess it is not. But I've now put it out there for everybody, so everybody's kind of heard those guideposts now. And I think, I'll just kick it off with the first one, which is, I'll let the panel kind of respond. We do have world-class reliability in PJM, in our region, and generally in the United States. And sure, we all get annoyed sometimes when power goes out for a few minutes or maybe, a day because of some big storm event or something. But overall, we have an extremely reliable grid. Can we continue to maintain that very high level of reliability using intermittent sources of energy? So, I don't know, who wants to jump in on that first?
I shouldn't do it, but I will anyway.
Thank you, Kathleen.
So I think the answer is, if we keep operating the system the way it was designed 20 years ago, the answer is no. But I think what we need to do is be, really proactive about looking at what the system is going to be in 20 years from now, and really do all the work that it takes between now and then to bring in the resources and operate them correctly to align with that future. And what are those resources that are going to provide the balancing services, the reliability value on a minute-to-minute basis that we need in that future? They're going to be new resources that we really don't know how to access and operate today. I mean, we're talking about a lot of electric vehicles, for example, that really can be controlled remotely, that can be told what to do, that can be given proper economic incentives to absorb all that excess power from wind that might otherwise be curtailed because there isn't enough transmission. That technology exists today, but some of the structures and the technical protocols and the communication systems and even the economic frameworks to incentivize someone to really operate that suite of vehicles and thermostats and all these distributed devices that are going to be needed, those don't really exist today. So I think we need to keep that vision in mind and that future resource mix in mind as we go, because that's going to be what drives our policy designs. There's going to be a lot of work that PJM needs to do under FERC jurisdiction and that states need to do in a very collaborative way to enable all of those resources to participate and provide the most value that they can. But then once you actually have that opportunity unlocked, really just through the right economic incentives and through the right access to data to the retail consumer, if those economic incentives are in place, I think we're going to see all that innovation from startups and companies that can come forward and offer that to the table.
Yeah, and I get, it's really funny. We hear this question a lot from policymakers, legislators in New Jersey and elsewhere. Well, boy, this sounds really hard. Can we do this reliably? And the answer is yes. I mean, the answer is yes at the end of the day. And this is a dangerous thing to say, seeing that I think I'm surrounded on all sides by engineers, or at least technical people. But cleaning the grid, getting to 100% clean energy, is not an engineering challenge. It is a systems challenge, and it's an economic challenge. Because we can do all these things that need to be doing. And I always people sort of gasp in horror when I say that, but 2030 is the easy part. Like, we are currently on a trajectory in New Jersey to have 80+% clean energy by 2030. So we need to take the next step and get us to that 100% level, and it requires a lot of systems changes that we really struggle with. So there are certainly technological issues that have to be ironed out. But we don't need a new miracle technology to get to 100% clean. Like, fusion would be great, right? Hydrogen holds a lot of promise. There are plenty of, advanced modular reactors, very exciting technologies. And if they come in and they're less costly, or they have better operational characteristics, in which case the economics will select them, that's great. But we don't need them to get to 100%. And I say that a lot because, I know people love investing in new things, but, good old wind, solar, and batteries is going to get us 99% of the way there. And then if somebody else can come in and do it cheaper and better, that's great. And I say it's an economics challenge because at the end of the day, we have to decarbonize at a price that New Jersey consumers can afford. And, one of my big concerns in all of this is that we end up, with a beautiful renewable grid that leaves a lot of New Jerseyans behind because they just can't afford it. And that's particularly acute with the low and moderate income community. And so as we think about doing these things, we need to employ the competitive markets to keep those costs down. And sometimes that means, and I do this a lot, probably said this to some of the people in this room, you have a great new technology, but is it economic? Does it require a large degree of subsidy, in which case we may pass? But because we need to look at it at the total economic impact and do this stuff in an affordable manner. Because if we don't, we will get to the point where the clean energy transition is stopped, not by regulatory process failures, though there's plenty of those, and not by technological limitations, because there are plenty of those too, but because we are simply increasing the burden on low-income customers to an unsustainable degree. And that will put the brakes on the clean energy transition like nothing else. So these are some of the things we think about as we go through this process. And a lot of what Ben and I do is trying to get the systems in place to get that least cost mix of reliable system power. And yeah, reliability has to be there, right? I mean, we've seen what happens if it's not in places like Texas and California. So I almost take that not as a given because we need to work on it, but it's sort of like that's the base case, and we just need to get to the lowest cost, reliable system that meets our clean energy targets. And that's where the economics comes in, and it has to be predominantly how we make our decision making.
So I'm going to come clean on my background just so everybody knows where I'm coming from. As Sue mentioned, I actually spent 27 years at PJM. I was the chief operating officer when I left. I went from PJM to Exelon, one of the largest utilities in the country, where I was 5 years the senior VP of transmission for all 6 of their utilities, including ACE. And I am now working with MAOD, which, if you hadn't noticed, is a joint venture between EDF and Shell, which should sound quite familiar because it was the same companies that Maguette and Atlantic Shores have talked about. So I have gotten to see it from almost every side of the industry at this point. I would tell you that to answer the first question, I'm not worried about reliability. It will be done reliable. I have complete confidence in the folks at PJM, the folks at the BPU, at FERC, that will be #1 priority. My concern is the speed at which it will progress to keep that reliability and the inefficiencies that will be there if we keep under the existing rules. I agree with the comment. We can't necessarily run the grid as we did 20 years ago. I would also tell you, changing the rules to run the grid in a competitive market, I have more scars on my back from people like Abe when he was in other lives, as to everybody wants to maintain their competitive advantage, whether that's existing or whether that's perceived. And everybody is looking at how changes to the markets, changes to the operations, ultimately affects them. And it is absolutely what you would expect in competitive situations. So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge. I agree, we do need to continue to evolve. We need to do it at a speed to reach the goals that have been put out there. I think it's doable, but I will not sit there and tell you it's not going to be without pain. It's not going to be without people stepping up and taking leadership roles like New Jersey. I will tell you, New Jersey is footing the bill for the SAA, $1 billion worth of transmission investments. I will absolutely tell you, they are not the only beneficiaries to those investments, but they were willing to step up and be the first. That's what it's going to take, a lot more of that, where people recognize there is a need on the system, there is needs for investments, whether that's in transmission infrastructure to allow us to move the power around in potentially patterns we've never seen on the grid, whether it's systems we need to integrate, demand response, other distributed resources into the overall mix and do it in efficient ways. Those kind of investments will be needed going forward. So again, I probably don't worry about reliability. I think, again, we're not Texas. And I don't foresee our states ever going there. But I will also tell you, and Sue will emphasize this, 13 different states. And again, you're going from New Jersey, Maryland, DC, West Virginia, Ohio, Illinois, very dramatically different positions on things under public policy. That is a huge challenge for the folks at PJM to figure out how to balance all those different, and again, in a cost-effective manner. Because I've been on the other side when the Western companies wanted to build transmission to bring land-based wind from the Midwest into the East. Of course, they wanted the East to pay for it. The East didn't want to pay for it. Just sort of the other shoe was on the other foot at that point. So again, I think there's going to be a lot of challenges and again, I would challenge, I think we are going to rely on the next generation. I'm phasing out and hopefully be phased out soon. Really to look at some of the innovative techniques, from all sides. And this is not just an engineering problem. It's an economic problem. It's a systems problem of how we bring all that together to sort of put this package.
Okay, I don't know if I have a whole lot more to say. Everyone's had such great comments, but I do really appreciate the comment about the reliability, because that is PJM's #1 job. And I can assure you that, without a doubt, that is something that we will be doing one way or another, regardless of the policies. We will ensure the grid is reliable and that the markets are efficient. But that being said, that I think the other comment that I just also want to echo is that because we are a multi-state organization, the value of working with all the states and finding how we can all collectively benefit, because the fact is the grid is interconnected. The electrons, they don't have to check their passport when they go between the states. They're going to all flow along with Ohm's laws, and it's not restricted. So there is a benefit, and you want that because having that interconnected grid provides huge economic benefits for everybody in reducing the amount of generation you have to have, having a more robust grid to withstand when lines get out because of whether it's lightning or other natural events that disrupt the grid, but the energy still flows. We do have a very reliable grid, and it can continue, but to make that evolution and that transition is going to require a lot of partnerships to work together to find what satisfies the state's needs, assures our reliability, and also ensures that the generation is solvent, that they can still make enough money to stay in business and be able to deliver that energy. And so it's one of the areas that it's a challenge at PJM because of such a diverse number of members and stakeholders. But our stakeholder process is designed to take all that into account, to figure out how do we change the rules so that we can still be reliable, an economically well-designed, efficient market, and yet still meet the needs of what we need as the PJM region in terms of greening the grid.
So, Sue, you just brought up that word, partnerships. And, and Mike had just talked about how New Jersey, through this being the first in the SAA, had to kind of go it alone. So can you give us some idea of, kind of where you see in the future down the road, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, maybe longer, what types of partnerships, or how might PJM be used, since it is a collection of many states with many different, transmission opportunities, how can you play a role, or how do you see this development of these kind of partnerships that are going to be needed, frankly, to really be able to put this whole thing together?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do have a lot of different states, and PJM has many venues in which we interact. We have the Organization of PJM States, we have the Cesac Independent State Agencies Committee, as well as all of our other various committees that states do participate in. One of the ways that we are encouraging more of that communication is through some of the scenario studies that we have been performing, and pulling those states in to understand, well, what are your goals? What are you looking to achieve? And have those conversations, and then identify what is the transmission impact. And I'm going to focus on planning because that is my background. I'm in transmission planning, but certainly there are also similar conversations around the markets aspects so I can't really speak to. That's not really my area of expertise, but PJM does have all those conversations. So focusing strictly on just the planning through some of these scenario studies can help inform the different states of what are going to be the overall impacts. Don't look at just one interconnection study that is in the queue, because that's not really going to give you a complete picture. So by doing the scenarios and looking at long-term, what if you achieve the policy? What if you want to go beyond the policy? What could it cost together? What could be the economic benefits, not only from the point of view of how much transmission do you need, can you design it more effectively, but also we've done economic studies in terms of the market prices. So that ties in not only the transmission, but the value of the renewable resources and integrating that into the plan. So that's one of the ways, and of course, obviously, all the conversations. The state agreement approach, it's although it had been in the rules for many years, it really wasn't implemented until recently because essentially New Jersey saw that there was this potential benefit. They didn't commit to this 2 years ago that they're definitely going to do it. We had to do all the analysis, bring in those solutions, and they did a lot of their own independent work to see, is this a better way, a better approach, and they determined that the solution that they came up with was. And while we're talking about $1 billion, the solutions actually went up to $7 billion. So it was a really thoughtful decision of, what's the good first step. Could there be more in the future? That will still remain to be seen. Is there a potential to do it with more than one state? We certainly believe that's very possible. And hopefully that we can have those conversations with other states and be able to demonstrate that this is a way that we can design transmission more effectively.
And just building on that, Sue, I think one of the problems with the self-pay, self-build on the transmission side, I think, as we know, is it's a collective action problem. Given the interconnected nature of the grid, so many states will benefit from this billion-dollar transmission upgrade. I think that the system we have under the SAA, where if you are acting as a single state, it makes it harder to move forward, right? Because you can have, we'll call it a collective action problem, you could call it a free rider problem. And to me, that suggests that, and I believe you guys are already taking a lead role to think through the next phase of the actual foundational transmission planning process, right? To say, how can we actually proactively plan for all the states' needs collectively and the consumers' needs collectively in sort of the a proactive, policy-focused planning approach. And I'm really excited to see how that can help to solve some of this collective action concern.
And just to add, we have regular conversations with the states and to help them understand what is the expertise that PJM can bring, what's the limits of what we can do, and also to talk about some ideas that could be the next level of transmission planning. And this is partially, also driven by FERC. FERC has put out notices of proposed rulemaking to look at long-term planning, to look at a more multi-benefit type analysis. Right now, it's fairly rigid in terms of we have reliability planning, we have economic planning for reducing congestion, and then we have public policy planning. And they're all very bucketed and separate. And that drives the cost allocation, which Mike alluded to, which is generally it's like the bane of my existence, because it makes everything so much harder. Because at the end of the day, someone's got to pay for this transmission. And how those cost allocation rules come into play are very, very challenging. With long-term planning, instead of just meeting, okay, what's the least cost I can do just to get me through the next 5 years, we might have this opportunity to look, okay, what do we see 15 years from now is going to be needed? And can we look beyond just, okay, what's the reliability need versus, or what's, does that solve congestion? Well, it might not pass the B to C ratio, the benefit to cost ratio, but it clearly has economic benefits, and we can justify maybe building for the longer term, and that might be able to benefit more than one. We may be able to have a more support from the broader region to build this transmission, as they'll recognize it. This is a better plan to think beyond the next 5 years.
I could probably just jump in with one other point too, in that I think we're also hampered by, regardless of what party is in charge of the administration in Washington, we have not had a national energy policy in the last couple of decades. And I think that really hampers us, because when outfits like PJM really have to get together and bring 13 states together, you end up with the least common denominator, unfortunately, because they can't get agreement on much more than that, and again, share costs. And that's why I said I don't necessarily concerned about reliability. That is one least common denominator everybody agrees with, and everybody lives with it. When you start to get into some of the more difficult conversations, particularly where, because there's no national policy, states are in very different places, it becomes very difficult to try to get some of those changes we're going to need going forward. So one of the things I would say is we would benefit greatly if we were to see something more at the national level being developed.
This has been a great conversation. I don't have a whole lot to add, but with all respect to Jim Ferris, probably the most important person for actually getting offshore wind transmission built is Sue Glatz. And so I hope you will all come up at lunch or elsewhere and just thank her for helping us out here, because it really I just want to get people to appreciate how much work went into this process. We started meeting with PJM in 2019. And I think Sue and her team, I see Stu Whittam here in the audience as well, has been on, literally weekly calls with us every week for at least an hour, sometimes two, going through and doing and evaluating this process. I've said, that I think probably the SAA is the most complicated and difficult project that state government has taken on, at least in my experience. Some people go back and say, oh, well, the initial rate cases for the nuclear units were bigger, or I've heard other people say that the Gateway project, building the bridge, or the tunnel, into Manhattan is bigger. And yeah, I'm sure various agencies here in the audience will be like, no, this was bigger. But this was this project stressed our internal capabilities in a way that I think no project ever has before. And so, it just sort of is a real testament to the relationship that we have with PJM, as well as the bidders. I mean, they did a great job too. And our outside consultant, Brattle, did a wonderful job as well. But really, it was the people in the room, with PJM committing themselves to doing this, excited about the process, the prospect that what we did here will be the pattern, a national model of success that was pioneered right here. And that's kind of like, that gives you a sense of the scale of the commitment that's necessary to get exciting things like this off the ground.
I'll just say that having been involved in that project as well, some weeks, a lot of weeks, it was twice a week meetings, not even just once a week. Twice a week.
I don't want to scare off the kids. We want them to apply to work with us.
Look, it's hard work, right? These things take hard work. Things that are worth doing take hard work, and this is one for us. So definitely, it was a big project. It was really impactful and meaningful, and so it took the work to get it done. So I want to invite folks out there in the audience to please let us know what's on your mind. What do you got? Do you have, Pankaj, do you have microphones? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Hey guys, great talk. So I'm Edmond Berisha. I'm an assistant professor of economics here at Montclair State. Now I'm going to ask a question related to economics. So all these projects are heavy capital intensive. So the offshore winding, the modernization of the grid system. So we are experiencing higher inflation with that. Interest rates are going up, so when you guys presented the cost effectiveness, are you taking that into account that we are entering the area of a sort of higher interest rate, which means it's going to last for sometimes in the future, which most likely is going to put the country into the economic slowdown, which probably is going to hurt the demand and sort of the demand from the household perspective. So that's my first question. The second one is more like in a macro level. If New Jersey is going to go zero gas emission, what if Texas says no? At the macro level, what are the benefits in there?
It's a great question, and one that we spend a lot of time thinking about. And it really affects so much of what we do, the inflationary environment. In the context of, say, our solar program, we've all recognized that the incentives we set in 2020 to incent the development of new solar, the economic situation's changed. COVID certainly changed it. The supply chain certainly changed it. But so has the inflationary environment. And so I think one of the things that government really struggles with is being responsive and quick, to respond to these sort of macroeconomic challenges. And it's one of the reasons that a lot of the programs, that we push, we really try to either shift the risk of those things off onto the developers and away from ratepayers, or we try to use a market-based system such that the market's coming and telling us what the price should be. And they can factor in and sort of control for a lot of those variabilities, in a way that's frankly better and quicker and more sophisticated than what government can do. But I'm glad you come back and talk about the impact on families, because this is really, this is a really critical thing. And one of the projects that I'm most proud of at the board is the fact that we are really trying to grow our energy efficiency program. And one of the things that I tell my daughter, right, the cheapest electricity is the electricity you never use. So turn off the light. It doesn't work. But when we think about sort of putting ourselves in this position at the state, where do we invest our money? Putting it into things like energy efficiency, where customers will actually see lower bills over the course of their life if they make that investment today. That's the kind of thing that we can do that really has, sort of the short-term economic benefit. And I think you'll see, that it's really been a major focus for us is to make sure that we are getting the energy efficiency and the benefits of energy efficiency, not only to rich people who can afford to put a lot of capital into their house, but make sure that we're not leaving those lower income communities behind. And so you see that's been a real focus of our energy efficiency program and also our solar program through the deployment of the community solar program. Because we need to make sure that these benefits are shared equally, and anything we can do to give customers more control over their own electricity consumption, as well as while greening it and making it more efficient, is critical to, to decreasing, I won't say eliminating, but decreasing the pain that we're all feeling through this just, insane, crazy inflationary environment.
Can speakers comment more on the strategy of New Jersey in developing the transmission infrastructure? Because in the conferences, we have been talking a lot about the production side, the Ocean Wind 1, Ocean Wind 2, but ultimately, from my perspective, the transmission is the bottleneck, is the limiting factor. You put in more capacity, the cable heats up, it sacks, and short circuit, and that's it. So there are a lot of countries in this in the world, like China. They have a lot more wind capacity than the United States, but a lot of that go into waste because they don't have the transmission to transmit the electricity to the load center. So what is the strategy of New Jersey going to do in transmission? New technologies like dynamic line rating, HVDC transmission, or what strategies are we doing? Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So I'll talk about the transmission strategy, because that is exactly what the whole state agreement approach is about, is because as you very correctly noted, is in order to get that generation, all that energy to shore, you will definitely need transmission. And that transmission, it can be built either by the incumbent transmission utilities, or it could also be built by the generators. And so in the case of New Jersey, it's going to be a little bit of both. At this stage, the generators, certainly the initial generators that have been selected as part of New Jersey's solicitation, will be constructing their lead lines, either AC initially or eventually down the road. We expect that they will be the DC technology. They will be constructing those lines. But onshore, that is the part of the, what is the Larrabee Tri-Collector solution, and this involves a number of rebuilds or upgrades of the existing transmission system that will essentially collect the energy at a station, which actually Mayad can talk a lot more detail about their particular role in it, but then interconnect to the bulk power system, the higher voltages, that will allow that energy to get right into the higher voltage where you have a lot more capacity to absorb that energy, and this minimizes the transmission investment. So that was another key part of the process, is to be able to, first of all, identify what are the strong potential candidates on the grid today that could absorb that amount of energy with the least amount of having to build more transmission, and then identifying what do we need to do to get to the amount of energy that New Jersey set as its target, which when we started the process was 7,500 megawatts, which we realize now we're going to probably need more to get to 11,000. And certainly we're ready to take care of that study as well. But the key right now is that is part of the plan. We're going to be upgrading, and in fact, there's even a little bit of transmission that will have to be in the neighboring states as well. Not as significant. Most of it's right in the state of New Jersey. And the solution that was selected is really ultimately the lowest cost solution that was on the table, that minimizes the impacts. And it's not just cost, it minimizes the environmental impacts, uses a lot of the existing infrastructure, which also makes it more cost effective essentially, and gives you more certainty or confidence that it can be built in the scheduled time frame.
Thanks. I know we're tight on time because I think my boss is going to be here for the keynote address, virtually at least, but maybe we have time for one more question.
Can I ask a question? Over here. Sorry.
Sorry, I couldn't see you.
I'll come in. First of all, thank you so much, all of you. I'm sure that those of us in the audience champion sustainability. It is so heartwarming to hear about all the progress the state has made. My question, I think, is more for Kathleen and sort of piggybacking on some of the conversation we were having earlier. From a corporate point of view, I come from the business school, a lot of corporations are hedging their net zero plans on grid decarbonization. And while the results here in New Jersey seem pretty good, as you work with a lot of public markets, in that scenario planning that corporations are doing, okay, pessimistic grid decarbonization or optimistic grid decarbonization, what are you seeing? What is the directional movement there?
And just to clarify, when you mentioned that a lot of the corporates are just hedging on grid decarbonization, that plus a clean energy procurement plan, right?
Yes,
Okay.
that plus, but that is a huge variable. That the grid plays a huge variable in reducing energy, in addition to procurement, renewable, VPPs, all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that the decarbonizing the grid is, I think at this point, based on what I know now, the most affordable and pathway to really get true decarbonization in many of the sectors. I think that is probably going to be a dominant strategy for many folks, especially folks that are taking a look at their pocketbooks. The strategies as relevant to corporates are so complex, and the issues are different from states, obviously, because as a corporate entity, you have to think about your financial and risk exposure depending on your strategy. Many corporates are right now puzzling with, is it okay for me to use a clean energy procurement strategy where actually some of the clean energy that I procure is over in Texas or Southwest Power Pool, where the supply of clean energy is very cheap and it offsets a lot of emissions potentially in some of these places, but yet my actual energy that I buy from the meter is maybe not in a state that is just not going to decarbonize. That's a mismatch that I personally am very comfortable with. I mean, I think that the greenhouse gas emissions are a global problem, and if some corporates have a footprint where they can think more broadly. But at the same time, they also need to think about, am I skirting around the actual issue? Is 100% clean energy, is that really 100% carbon free? Not always. I think our accounting standards are insufficient to determine that at this point. We actually don't have the next generation of renewable energy and greenhouse gas products that can actually give investors in those companies the confidence that actually we really are decarbonizing, if we get that far away. And I also see a lot of leadership from some of the corporates and their entities to kind of push the envelope further to the next generation of products that can actually better quantify and align the greenhouse gas accounting with their procurement plans. We don't have a solution yet, but I'm really optimistic that we're moving a lot further forward.
I'm just going to say, it's useful to think about New Jersey as a super large corporate buyer. It's like one of the things that we think about. I know Senator Smith is going to be here this afternoon. You should all ask him about his current legislation, looking at this, sort of setting almost a corporate goal for New Jersey to get to 100% clean energy by 2035. And those kind of accounting rules that Kathleen's talking about are so critical and so important. And it's really exciting that we kind of as a society are finally, perhaps belatedly, moving in that direction such that we can actually put the structures in place that will define how that clean energy future looks like.
Well, I know we're at time. I want to thank all of you in the audience for being here and participating. This obviously is not going to be the last one of these conversations about greening the grid, so stay tuned. Stay tuned to BPU, to PJM, to here at Montclair State. I'm sure you're going to be hearing a lot more from some of these folks and others in the coming days, weeks, months. But for right now, please join me in thanking the panels.